We are 3 weeks away from the NFL draft. I don't think there's a doubt in anyone's mind about who is going to be the number one pick. I think we can all agree that Joe Burrow is going number one. Roger Goodell's probably already clearing his throat and practicing. With the first overall pick in the 2020 NFL draft, the Cincinnati Bengals select Joe Burrow, quarterback from LSU. But will it be the Bengals who end up drafting Joe Burrow? If you've been listening to the mainstream sports media, some talking heads are convinced that the Miami Dolphins are going to trade up for the number one pick and draft Joe Burrow. Miami's got 3 first-round picks in this draft. Number 5, number 18, number 26. The supposed deal would have Miami trade all 3 of those picks to Cincinnati for the number one pick and the right to draft Joe Burrow. I don't know where this rumor originated from, but this deal doesn't make sense for either team. Let's start with the Dolphins. I know that Miami is just as starved for a franchise quarterback as the Bengals are. Miami hasn't had a franchise quarterback since Dan Marino. He retired 20 years ago. That's a long time to go without a franchise quarterback. That's an entire generation that there hasn't been a franchise quarterback in Miami. But it doesn't make sense for the Dolphins to trade away 3 first-round picks just to get Joe Burrow. There are a couple of reasons why. First, this draft is loaded with quarterbacks. There's not a shortage of potential franchise quarterbacks in this draft. Miami's got the 5th pick. Besides Cincinnati, Washington, Detroit, and the Giants are ahead of them. Now, who knows what the Redskins will do? They just drafted Dwayne Haskins last year, but he didn't exactly light the world on fire. Detroit appears to be holding on to Matt Stafford, so they don't need a quarterback. The Giants have Daniel Jones. So the Dolphins will have plenty of quarterbacks to choose from with the number 5 pick. And they can hold on to their other 2 first-round picks to deepen their roster. The second reason, teams trading up to get a top-level draft pick is very risky. It doesn't always have positive results. Back in 2012, the Redskins traded 3 first-round picks and a second-rounder so they could draft Robert Griffin III at number 2. He started for 2 years. He was gone out of Washington by 2015. In 1990, the Colts traded a 5th-round pick and a first-rounder in the 1991 draft to the Falcons to move up to number 1 to draft Jeff George. Now, that sounds like a steal, right? The problem was Jeff George sucked. He was 14-35, and a few years later, Indy ended up trading him to Atlanta. More recently, in 2017, the Bears dealt their number 3 pick along with 2 others, along with a 3rd-round pick in the 2018 draft, to draft Mitchell Trubisky. Now, considering Chicago just picked up Nick Foles in free agency, I think it's fair to say that Trubisky's not working out. My point is, it's risky trading a shitload of draft picks to trade up and draft one player. The NFL draft is a crapshoot. For every Peyton Manning, there are 5 Mitchell Trubiskys. You don't know what you're going to get. NFL scouts are the best in the business at what they do. And they can't even figure the shit out. They don't know if somebody's going to be great or they're going to be out of the league in 2 or 3 years. So in a draft that is loaded with potential franchise quarterbacks, it just doesn't make any sense for Miami to trade 3 first-round picks to move up from number 5 to number 1. Is Joe Burrow really that much better than Justin Herbert, Jordan Love, Tua? For as little sense this trade makes for Miami, it makes even less sense for Cincinnati. It is extremely rare to catch lightning in a bottle. The Cleveland Cavaliers caught lightning in a bottle back in 2003 when they had the number 1 pick in the draft. And the hometown kid, LeBron James, was in that draft class. Joe Burrow's from Ohio. He grew up a few hours outside of Cincinnati. The Bengals are one of the few NFL franchises that haven't had a franchise quarterback in decades. Who was the last franchise quarterback in Cincinnati? Boomer Esiason? The prime of his career was happening around the time that I was born in the 1980s. And don't try and make the argument that Andy Dalton was a franchise quarterback. He wasn't. Franchise quarterbacks win playoff games. I've won as many playoff games as Andy Dalton. I don't know how great Joe Burrow will be at the NFL level. He could be a bust. I think he's got the potential to be good. I know the media is in love with Tua. I'm not exactly sold on him. I'd draft Burrow over any other quarterback in this draft class. But what I do know is Joe Burrow will give the Bengals hope that they haven't had in 3 decades. And if he wins some games, he will rocket to superstardom. He is exactly what the Cincinnati Bengals need right now. Hometown kid, charismatic, he's got star power. More importantly, he's come out publicly and stated that he's not going to pull an Eli Manning. He will play for the Bengals if they draft him. Now, me personally, I'd rather play for an XFL team than play for the Bengals. They're the worst franchise in the NFL, but to each his own. Cincinnati desperately needs Joe Burrow. Like LeBron James, all the ingredients are there for him to rejuvenate his hometown team. The Bengals ranked dead last in attendance last season. 2018, they ranked 30th. 2015, they won the damn division, ranked 24th. No one is going to Paul Brown Stadium to watch the Bengals play. Joe Burrow would change that. This is a once-in-a-lifetime, holy shit opportunity for the Cincinnati Bengals. It might be another 20, 30 years for the Bengals to have the number 1 pick in the draft and a hometown kid being touted as the number 1 overall pick. Like I said a second ago, Joe Burrow might be a bust. He might end up being a top 5 quarterback. We don't know. But if you're Cincinnati, you've got to take a chance on him. It's just too good of an opportunity to pass up. All right, Texans coach Bill O'Brien has finally come out publicly and given a reason for the DeAndre Hopkins trade, also known as the worst trade in recent memory, a debacle, a heist by the Arizona Cardinals, straight robbery. The Houston Texans had a conference call Friday with season ticket holders, and of course, one of the questions to Bill O'Brien was, why the hell did you trade one of the best receivers in the NFL in his prime for a handicapped running back and a couple of draft picks? The person asking the question obviously was more polite than I just was, but you get the point. Bill O'Brien started his answer with the typical coach speak. It was best for the team. No one believes that, of course, but then he got to the real reason. DeAndre Hopkins was traded because he asked for a raise. He asked for more money with 3 years left on his contract. And simply put, Bill O'Brien didn't want to give him more money. I understand O'Brien's perspective. Hopkins is only 2 years into a 5-year deal. It's not like he's entering the final year of his contract and asking for an extension. But you also have got to look at this from the perspective of DeAndre Hopkins. When he signed that contract during the 2017 offseason, he had been to just 1 Pro Bowl in 4 years. He wasn't the 3-time All-Pro that he is today. He had made 3 straight Pro Bowls. DeAndre Hopkins scored more touchdowns in 2017 and 2018 than he had in his first 4 years in the NFL combined. When he signed that contract in 2017, he was not the elite receiver that he is today. He wasn't top 3 in the NFL. He wants to be paid at the level that he is now. He's earned it. Put yourself in DeAndre Hopkins' shoes. You're one of the best receivers in the NFL. Your current contract is going to take you into your 30s, when wide receivers in this league tend to drop off in production. So right now is the only time that you can take advantage of the skills you've worked your entire life to perfect and make big time money. Not to mention the fact that you see guys around the league making more money than you, and you know you're better than them. You know you mean more to your team than they do. AJ Green makes more money than DeAndre Hopkins, and he's been irrelevant for 2 years. Mike Evans makes more money. He's never made it to the playoffs. There are 7 receivers in the NFL making more money than DeAndre Hopkins. Do you know how many of those guys were in the playoffs last year? 2. Hopkins has helped the Texans win the AFC South for the last 5 years. For 7 years, through all the quarterback changes, all the turnover on this roster, there's been one constant in Houston: DeAndre Hopkins. Matt Schaub, TJ Yates, Ryan Fitzpatrick, Case Keenum, Tom Savage, Ryan Mallett, Brock Osweiler, Brian Hoyer, Brandon Weeden. Before Deshaun Watson, these were the quarterbacks that DeAndre Hopkins was playing with. And he was still going for over 1,000 yards damn near every year. The Texans were still making the playoffs. DeAndre Hopkins is a rare talent. It is extremely rare for a receiver to be so good that he makes the quarterbacks better. Normally it's the other way around. DeAndre Hopkins was carrying these quarterbacks I just listed into the playoffs year in and year out. Everyone always talks about how great Odell Beckham is. If he's so great, how come the Giants and the Browns consistently suck? Everyone wants to talk about how great Amari Cooper is. How come he disappears on the road? How come the Cowboys didn't make the playoffs last season in the worst division in football? Bill O'Brien fucked up. Again, you don't trade an elite talent like DeAndre Hopkins. This is going to have major ramifications in Houston. I don't care that they signed Randall Cobb. He's good, but he's a number 2 receiver. He's not DeAndre Hopkins. The Texans, more specifically Deshaun Watson, is going to miss seeing number 10 wide open down the field next season. When Bill O'Brien gets fired, and he will, we will look back at this trade as the beginning of the end of his time in Houston. Because eventually, the McNair family is going to have to make a choice. We can either keep Deshaun Watson, or we can keep Bill O'Brien. If you owned the Houston Texans, what would you do? It's an easy decision. All right, moving on. I was looking around on ESPN the other day, and I found an article about Tom Flacco. Now, if you don't know who Tom Flacco is, don't feel bad, because I didn't either. I had never heard of him. I immediately figured out that he's the younger brother of Joe Flacco. He's a decade younger. He'll be in the draft this year. I didn't even know Joe Flacco had a brother until I read this article. Tom Flacco was the quarterback at Towson. I believe that's a D2, D3, whatever the fuck the NCAA is calling the smaller schools now. There's a big difference, though, between Tom and Joe Flacco. Joe Flacco is 6'6". His brother is 6'1". He's the shortest quarterback in this year's draft class. Now, that's not to say that shorter quarterbacks can't make it in the NFL. Drew Brees is listed at 6 feet tall. He's more like 5'10", 5'11". Russell Wilson is around 6 feet tall. Both of those guys are future Hall of Famers. But both Drew Brees and Russell Wilson have a unique skill set. If you're going to be a short quarterback in the NFL, you have got to be elite. You can't get away with being mediocre like a quarterback with height can. Drew Brees offset his height by being the most accurate passer in the history of the NFL. Russell Wilson offset his height by using it to his advantage. He's small. He gets lost in the pocket. He uses his speed to his advantage. Tom Flacco is predicted to be a late round draft pick if he even gets drafted at all. I'm not going to sit here and analyze his college career or speculate where he might end up because honestly, who gives a shit? The reason I'm mentioning this at all is because there was one sentence in the ESPN article that caught my attention. In comparison to his brother Joe, ESPN asked the question, can Tom Flacco be elite too? When was Joe Flacco elite? Since 2008, can someone please tell me one season in which Joe Flacco was a top 5 quarterback? Hell, I'll even go top 10 quarterback. Well, what about the 2012 Super Bowl run? He was great that season. Was he? I'll give credit where credit is due. I won't even call him Joe Flacco when talking about this because Joe Flacco was phenomenal during the 2012 Super Bowl run in the playoffs. 11 touchdowns, 0 interceptions, went on the road, beat Tom Brady in New England. He even played great during the Super Bowl. But during that regular season, he was typical Joe Flacco. Completed less than 60% of his passes. The last 5 weeks of the 2012 regular season, the Ravens were 1-4. Flacco was throwing for less than 200 yards a game, completing 58% of his passes. Much like Eli Manning did during his 2 Super Bowl runs, Joe Flacco caught fire at the right time. As great as he was during that 2012 playoff run, he was still a highly inaccurate passer. I mean, he made some big plays in crunch time. I'll give him credit for that. I mean, I can still remember to this day that 70-yard bomb that he threw to Jacoby Jones late in the fourth quarter when they were playing Denver in the divisional round. I think it ended up tying the game. They won it in overtime. Joe Flacco was clutch during that time. But one great playoff run doesn't make you an elite quarterback. I feel like the words great, elite, legendary, whatever you want to say, get thrown around too often. Eli Manning won 2 Super Bowls. But he was never an elite quarterback. He was never a top 10 quarterback. I feel like Joe Flacco and Eli Manning are in the same class of quarterback. Serviceable guys, never great, not bad, but both had to have greatness around them to excel. Until the Saints drafted Michael Thomas, Drew Brees had never played with a Hall of Fame running back or receiver, or tight end for that matter, but has been consistently elite his entire career. For the majority of Tom Brady's career, he's played with running backs and receivers that no one's ever heard of. That's why he got the hell out of New England. Seriously, do you think Joe Flacco is a Hall of Fame quarterback? Because I don't. I don't think Eli Manning's a Hall of Fame quarterback, but he's guaranteed to get in. Just because you win a Super Bowl doesn't mean you're a Hall of Famer. Phil Simms won a Super Bowl, not in the Hall of Fame. Trent Dilfer won a Super Bowl, not in the Hall of Fame. The reality is, for the entirety of Joe Flacco's career, he was a mediocre quarterback. He was average. So if you ask if Tom Flacco can be, quote, elite like Joe Flacco, for his sake, I sure as hell hope not. Because at 6'1", he's not going to get away with being wildly inconsistent and an inaccurate passer like Joe Flacco did because he was 6'6". Let's switch gears to the NBA for a second. I haven't talked much about the NBA since they suspended the regular season. Besides, I mentioned here and there about the restart of the regular season, what it could look like, or playing playoff games in empty arenas. There really hasn't been much news out of the NBA since mid-March. That changed a little bit Friday afternoon. NBA insider Brian Windhorst was on SportsCenter, and he had some not so good news about the potential return of the NBA. Here's what he said. It is clear that the NBA is angling to set up a deal that enables them to shut the season down. They don't have to do that yet. The way they're negotiating, they're leaving an option either way, but they're not having talks about how to restart the league. They're having financial talks regarding player salaries about what would happen if the season shuts down. I think there's a significant amount of pessimism. That's what Brian Windhorst had to say. I wish I could say he was wrong, but he is usually spot on when it comes to the NBA. If this is the case, I think it's the wrong approach at this point. We're at the beginning of April. There's a lot that can change over the next month or two. Many of the so-called experts believe that the coronavirus is going to peak over the next 2 weeks and then it will start to decline. If that's the case, I would assume that the NBA would be good to go by June to restart the regular season. Now, I know they had a conference call with President Trump yesterday, the NBA, all the major sports leagues in America. And the president said that it was his hope that by August, September, fans could start returning to the arenas. So the coronavirus is not going to have an effect on the NFL season. That's good news. But at this point, it looks like if the NBA does return, they're going to be playing in empty arenas. I also saw something last night about the league talking about having a horse tournament. Now, I don't know what the hell that's all about. I don't understand that at all. This is professional basketball. This isn't two friends in their driveway playing horse. I don't like that at all. The last thing we need right now is the NBA giving up prematurely on restarting their season or jumping right into the playoffs. We all get it. The coronavirus is highly contagious. We don't want to put people's lives at risk. The entire country is shut down right now. But we're going to get back to normal at some point. 60 days is a long time. A lot can change from now until June. I get the point that the NBA is looking at all options, including shutting down the regular season. I would think that's the last thing they want to do. I know for a fact it's the last thing that the networks, ESPN, ABC, TNT, that's the last thing they want. The networks make their money during the playoffs. From what I understand, they pretty much break even during the regular season. The profits that the networks make from the NBA broadcasts comes from the advertising during the playoffs, which makes perfect sense because that's when NBA ratings are at their peak. I hope this is just preparation on the NBA's part for a last resort type option. Right now, I'm kind of in the honeymoon period of staying at home. Bars and restaurants where I live have been closed for about 3 weeks now, but we weren't issued a stay-at-home order on the Gulf Coast until Friday afternoon. So I've been fixing things at my house, catching up on my DVR, watching shows on Netflix that I usually don't have time to watch when my life is normal. But after a couple of weeks of this, it's going to get old fast. Summertime is my least favorite time of year. Months of June, July, and August suck for a number of reasons. The heat and humidity down here on the coast is unbearable. There's no relief. Miserable during the day, it's still hot at nighttime. But it's also bad because there are no sports. Once the NBA Finals end, there's no sports for me until college football kicks off. So for the first time since I was in high school or college, I was actually looking forward to this summer. The NBA restarting the regular season in early June, hopefully. We had the playoffs running through July and August. I'd have the NBA to entertain me the entire summer. And once the NBA Finals ended, we would jump straight into football season. I'm trying to stay positive. I hope that will be the case. I don't want all the teams playing in Las Vegas. I don't want a horse tournament. If the NBA returns, I want it to be in the traditional sense. The coronavirus has already taken away my golf season. It's just not as much fun playing golf in July in 95-degree heat and 100% humidity. I hope and pray that this virus doesn't take away the NBA regular season and playoffs as well. I hope the NBA is just preparing for the worst at this point. All right, that's all for today, guys. Make sure to hit that like and subscribe button. Click that notification bell to receive all notifications from the channel. Leave me a comment in the section below. You can follow me on Twitter at KC_BTL84. I'll be back on Tuesday. Enjoy the rest of your weekend.